All right, friends, here we are in the next lesson. But to refresh your memory, in the previous lesson, we created the to-do list context, and we sorted all the to-dos inside the state of this context. Then, inside the to-do list component, we reached all the to-dos using this use context hook, and we have mapped over the to-dos array and output them onto the browser. So in this lesson, we are going to add new to-dos to this to-do list. Okay, so these to-dos are inside the to-do list context in here. We stored all the to-dos inside this state. So we have two things in here. We have the actual data, which we call to-dos, and also we have set to-dos, which is the function we are going to use to change the state. And for this reason, we can add or remove to-dos inside this to-do list context component. All right, so we're going to define two functions inside this component. The first function is going to be to add a new to-do to the state, and the second function will be to remove a to-do from this state. All right, so first, let's start by adding a new to-do to data. Say that 3 times fast. So I'm going to say const add to-do is equal to an arrow function. Inside here, we'll take a parameter, the to-do, the new to-do that we want to add. And inside this function, we need to add this new to-do to this to-dos array. Remember, we use this set to-dos function to change the state. So we need to call that set to-dos function. And inside that function, we need to completely replace whatever data is inside here. So we pass in an array, and this is going to be the new array of to-dos. We need to spread out the current content of the to-dos array into this, so we don't want to override it. So ... to-dos, and I'm going to spread all to-dos in here, like so. Then a comma, then a new object, which will be the new to-do. All right, so now we have a text property, which is going to be equal to the to-do we take in as a parameter in here, and ID property, which is equal to the math.random function. And we're going to create a random ID while we are adding new to-dos for each to-do that gets added. You may use UUID NPM packages or another different package to generate unique IDs. I did this just like so. Okay, so when we want to add a new to-do, we'll call this function, which is now passing the new to-do as a parameter. And it's going to take that new value and assign it to this text property right here. And we're also generating a unique ID for each newly created to-do. Thus, we are adding a new to-do object to this to-dos array. Okay, so now that we know that, when we call this add to-do function with a new to-do parameter, it's going to add that new to-do to this data. All right, so now what we want to do is call this function from the to-do list component. And to do that, first of all, we will need to attach this function to value props of this context provider. So I'll say add to do right in here. Now we can reach out for this add to do function from the to-do list component. And let's save it and go to the to-do list component. Okay, so now we can grab that add to do function from this to-do list context. And I'll put a comma here and deconstruct that add to do function. Now we need to pass a parameter to this add to do function, which will be the new to do that we want to add. So to do that, we're going to create an input field and an add to do button. So that way we'll be able to type a new to-do into the input field that we're going to create, and then click on an Add To-Do button that we will also create in a minute. Now, when we do that, we're going to get the new to-do that gets typed into the input field and pass that new to-do into this Add To-Do function as a parameter. Make sense? So I'll show you how we're going to do that. First, I'm going to create a form in here. And inside the form element, I'm going to create an input field. And this will have type text. And I will create a submit button to be able to submit this form. I'll say input, and type is going to be submit. And it looks like that. So let's take this semantic UI class from this button and add it to this submit button to make it a little bit nicer. Okay, so let's add a label to this form element, and I will say label. And inside the label, let's say add to do. All right, so now we need to add HTML4 as an attribute to this label. So I will say HTML4 and to do, like so. Then we need to add ID property to this input to attach it to this label. So I will say ID is going to be to do, like so. Okay, so let's save it and preview it in the browser. Right, it's fine, but inside this button, let's say add to do instead of this submit text. So to do that, I will add value props to this submit button and set it to be equal to add new to do. All right, let's save that and flip on back to the browser. So now what we want to do is we're going to type something into this input field and hit that button, and then we're going to grab whatever the user has typed in and pass it as a parameter to this add to do function. Can you feel the tension building? So this add to do function gets that parameter in here and creates a new to do with that user entry. Okay, so to grab that user entry, I am going to add an onChange event to this input and attach it to handle change as a function like so. And we will create this function in just a bit. So whenever the user types something in an input field, this onChange event will automatically fire, and this onChange event will call the handle change function. So let's create that function in here. So let's say const handle change. And this is going to be an arrow function. And we get that event parameter in here. So the input value will be attached to this target objects of this event. So let me show you that in the developer console. I'll say console log e.target.value. Let's save it to go to the developer console. Okay, so let's right-click in here and say inspect to preview developer console. So now when I type something in here, we can see it in console right here. Okay, so let's take whatever we have typed in and pass that into the add to do function. To do that, first of all, we'll need to store that data in this component state. So let's create that state. So I'll just say use state and give an empty string to this state for an initial value. Then this will be equal to const and open up an array for the first value. I'll just say to do. And for the second, I will say set to do to set this piece of state. Then in here, I will get this target value and set the to-do state with that value. So I'll say set to-do and call that function. Inside this function, I will say e.target.value. Okay, so we are now getting whatever the user has typed in here and storing that data into this to-do state. Okay, so now we should import the useState hook in here. Don't want to forget that. And now the only thing we need to do is pass this state to the addToDo function. And I'm going to pass it when this form is submitted. So I will add an onSubmit event to form. So when we submit this form, I'm going to call handle form submit callback. And we can create that callback in here. I will say const handle form submit. And this function will be called with the event parameter again. And this is also going to be an arrow function. So as you know, when we submit forms, we need to call the event.preventDefault to prevent the default behavior of the form element. Like so. Otherwise, the page will be refreshed on each form submit. Don't want that. Okay, so now we can call this addToDo function in here. And I will say addToDo and pass new to-do as parameter to this function. That's it. So now we are getting whatever the user types inside this input field with this handle change event and storing that data inside this to-do state because it will be the new to-do. Then, when we submit the form or when we click on this Add New To-Do button, we are calling this addToDo function with the new to-do parameter. This function call will trigger this function inside the to-do list context. And then this will receive the user entry as parameter and updates this to-do state with the new to-do value. Now inside of here, we will spread out all of the current value of state and add new to-do to it. And when we update this state with new value, we will pass the updated to-dos array into this value props, and then we will receive the update to-dos array in the to-do list component as well. Make sense? Because then we will map over the updated to-dos array in here, and it'll render the new to-do list. Okay, so let's save it and preview it in the browser. All right, so let's just type in new to-do here and press Add New To-Do button. Okay, so we have added a new to-do. Let's type in Hello World. All right, so we've added the Hello World as a new to-do. But I think that we should fix this CSS issue. Did you notice it? The buttons are overflowing in here. Now, I know why this is happening. Do you? Well, it's because we just gave a fixed height to this container here. So let's just open up our code editor and remove this height property. So now it should work, right? Okay, so let's type something in here and press enter. Yeah, see, it works. Then let's type something again. Okay. All right, so that's how you add a new to-do to the context state. Let's take a short break here, and in the next lesson, we're going to learn how to remove a date from context state. Sounds intriguing? I'll see you in the next lesson.